I believe you can do it. Not in the fluffy self-help kind of way, but in the get your ass moving kind of way. My name is Ashley, and I believe that you are smart enough and resourceful enough to figure out your dreams as you go along. All you need to do is dare to begin. I want to encourage you to do this by reading you my story of how I ran across America. Not just how, but also why. This is my Lunge and Listen series where I read a new chapter of my book every Tuesday and Thursday at noon Central Time. So, grab a cup of tea and let's begin. Before I begin the chapter today, I want to read one of the endorsements on my book from celebrity Montel Williams. Montel is an award-winning television host. He lives with MS, he's a veteran, and he has been a longtime supporter of my work. Montel says, Ashley's story is a masterclass in what happens when belief meets action. In 2010, I supported her run across America because I believe in the power of one voice to make a difference. What she has built since, a nonprofit and a movement captured in a compelling and beautifully written memoir, is inspiring. This book is for anyone who has ever asked, can I really do this? The answer is yes. You are strong enough to do anything. Chapter 1, Leading to This. A lot can happen in 3 miles. I'd discover this soon enough as my harpsichord alarm awoke me from my slumber. The melody chimed from my phone, and in the complete darkness of a room with no windows, I quieted the sound and crept out of my bunk. The floor of the ship rocked ever so slightly as it sailed into port. My roommate would sleep later, so I slipped into the bathroom, a tight space 4 feet wide and 4 feet long, and flipped on a fluorescent light that beamed above the mirror. I was up before dawn, as I often was, to exercise and shake out the drinks from the night before. I took inventory of my face, smudged mascara and some puffiness, but not too bad. I turned on the hot water and washed it all away. Once dressed in cotton shorts, a sports bra, a gray orthopedic sports medicine t-shirt, and running shoes, I pulled my pixie-cut hair into spike pigtails and brushed my teeth. I was on the second deck of the ship, located in the hull, as low as one could go without dropping into the engine rooms and cargo spaces. This is where the crew slept. The ship I was working on was on a 2-week repeat tour of Europe at the tail end of the summer season, churning waters from England to Spain to Italy to Africa and then back again. I had boarded my first cruise ship 2 years prior, a used and outdated one doing weekend trips from Los Angeles, and since then, I had smiled my way up to the newest ship in the fleet. As sports staff, I helped manage the activity deck with a close-knit group of coworkers. It was a coveted position, our workspace being on the top deck of the cruise ship in open air, 230 feet above the water. We had a panoramic view of the ocean, and it was the only staff position that didn't work when it rained. When I clocked in, I did things like belay a 40-foot rock wall and teach passengers how to surf on our simulated wave machine. I layered on sunblock, but still tanned like a Texas cowboy, my slathering being no match to the hours I spent breathing in the salty sea air. In port, the sports deck closed down to push passengers off the boat, and I got to do the same. What do you think, we'd say to each other? Should we head into Rome or go to that winery instead? I went shopping in London and lay on the beaches of Nice. I toured the French Riviera by helicopter and ate authentic Italian pizza in Italy. I surfed the streets of Portugal quite literally on a wooden sled and marveled at the Colosseum. I visited Rome, the Rock of Gibraltar, the Canary Islands, Ireland. People ask why, at the age of 24, having never run a marathon before, I quit this dream job of mine to run 125 consecutive marathons across America. Why, with zero fundraising experience, I decided to raise $500,000 for multiple sclerosis. I write it out in a single sentence, and it all sounds so absurd, especially when there were other, more ill-fitting factors, like the fact that I stumbled tipsy to bed many nights a week, I loved to travel and was being paid to do it, relished a good joint on the beach, and had no intentions of doing anything different for the foreseeable future. I wasn't looking for a reason to rectify the pain I carried from my mother's disease with a pair of running shoes. I was looking for a free drink at the bar and what connections I needed to get a contract through Alaska. There is no simple answer except to say that, over the course of a 3-mile run in Barcelona, it came to me that everything that had happened in my life led to this, that it had been waiting for me to come upon it all along, and for reasons that I still wonder about today, I trusted it. I was 22 years old when I boarded my first ship, and I didn't look back for exactly 25 months and 23 days when I found reason to believe that the thing that drove me there would actually be the thing to bring me home. It was called multiple sclerosis, and it battered my life. Like raging waters beating on an earthen shore, it eroded pieces of my mother away, one affliction at a time, until the most of what remained were the lessons I learned in its presence. That and her essence, which elegantly withheld the storms. She loved bacon and Jesus, not equally, but almost, and watched Young and the Restless every day at 11 a.m. on CBS 58. Her breath smelled of sweet cinnamon gum, and she was the kind of lady who wore pantyhose with both her dresses and pants. Standing at 5'0", she towered in a crowd, beaming with joy so abundant her eyes smiled, even when nobody was looking. People gravitated towards her because of it. An optimist and an extrovert, she had a true interest in people and also loved them. It happened again, my dad would chuckle. I sat her on the bench outside the doctor's office, and by the time I got back, she had a new best friend. See you later, Nancy, I heard her say. What a piece of work. She beamed at his side, grinning while he recalled the story. She was my mother and what I knew a woman to be. So when parts of her began disappearing, I grieved their departure like a deep loss, portions of her that I adored, drifting away in the storm. I was 8 when we gave up biking together, her leaving the house with me riding at her side, her skidding into a ditch after losing her balance, us walking back together, her bruised and bloody. At 11, it was water skiing, her trying relentlessly to pop out of the water as she had always done, us watching from the speedboat, cheering her on, her becoming so fatigued that my father had to pull her from the water. At 14, I listened from the steps while her hands fumbled along the piano keys, trying to find that once graceful melody. It was gone. By the time I sailed upon the seas, she had endured 1,000 losses, and my concept of what a mother should be, helpful, capable, a caregiver, had died 1,000 times too. My mom, Jilly Bean, tiny and loving, everyone adored her, especially my father. I came along third in their line of wild offspring: marriage, my sister April, multiple sclerosis, Aaron, Ashley, Dawn, all born just a few years apart. D for done, my mom would say after rattling off our names. She always had a cutesy way of spelling things out. K-U, M as in Mary, L-I-E-N as in nice was our last name. They met at a bar in Milwaukee. My father was the audio tech for a band, and my mother was a catching young blonde who came to a show. She lingered some time after the set, drinking a white Zinfandel and sending glances his way. A handsome fella with shaggy brown hair and a chevron mustache. She wasn't bad to look at, he thought, and much to his surprise, her beauty wasn't only skin deep. She listened intently with delighted eyes and touched his arm just so when he told a joke, throwing her head back in a laugh. "Would you like another glass?" he asked. She said thank you with blushing cheeks. If he had asked her to marry him then, I imagined she would have said yes, being the romantic that she was. But my father was a procrastinator. The proposal materialized years later only at the possibility of losing her. 5 years of courtship and no ring, Jill walked away from that relationship, leaving Keith right where she found him, with his buddies in a bar. I sat on that bar stool looking around, wondering what the hell was my problem, he'd say later, telling the story. I was never going to find a better gal than your mother. Keith left the bar that night and went straight to Jill's apartment, banging on her door at 2 a.m. She opened that door and I said, "All right, we'll get married, but we're going to have a long engagement." 6 months later, they tied the knot. Jill had a tender way of getting her way. Dawn was a blessing surprise that came after my parents decided 3 kids were enough. "I'd have as many as we could make if it had been up to me," Dad would say. What he meant was that multiple sclerosis put a timeline on their family planning. The disease is unpredictable that way, attacking anyone at any time and being completely unique in its progression. One can manage mild symptoms for the rest of their life or end up in a wheelchair by the end of the year. The majority of those diagnosed fluctuate somewhere between those two, but the worst case scenario is terrifying. My mother lay still during her first MRI scan as best as she could and hoped for a simple answer to the unexplainable sickness she felt, nausea, headaches, and dizziness for days on end. She thought it was a flu, but when it didn't go away, they scanned her brain. "Are you claustrophobic?" the machine tech asked. She shook her head no. "Do you have anything metallic in you, a heart stent, a pacemaker, any pumps or surgeries of any sort?" She was almost sure no, but now she wondered, did she? Could something have happened when she was younger and wasn't told? No, there was nothing, she was sure. She shook her head no. "Do you have anything in your pockets, in your hair, buckles or fastens of any sort? It's very important that you have no metal objects in you or on you." The questioning made her nervous. Her husband stood in the waiting room soothing their 18-month-old child. What if she was wrong? What if there was something? No, she had it right. There was nothing. She shook her head no. The results came back, and what her family got was an answer of complex unknowns in the form of a degenerative disease that they had never heard of, multiple sclerosis. The Greek name meant many scars, and the disease coursed through her central nervous system, wreaking havoc on the pathways between the brain and the body. It was 1980, and science was only beginning its research. With my father gone during the day at work, they took a gamble having 3 more kids, not knowing if, when, or how severely her health might decline. Who would take care of us and my mother? How would they make it work? It was a belief in something higher, a trust in their path despite these challenging circumstances. Too much good to measure has come from that willingness. Later, when I heard these stories, I wondered if the many scars were just hers or if they included the ones we endured as a family. Pain, numbness, fatigue, and mental fog were just a few of her regular symptoms. But the more troublesome ones, like immobility and bladder dysfunction, appeared and lingered at the most inconvenient times. I was 14 when things turned bad. Okay, that's chapter 1. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will read chapter 2 next week, Tuesday at noon Central Time. I hope you'll join me. Have a great day.